Grom, and welcome to our 58th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our forum is to demonstrate that civility in discussing contentious topics is not only possible, but necessary if anything of value is going to come out of our discussions with each other. Today's topic deals with the redefining of state legislative boundaries, which is mandated by the U.S. Constitution to occur every 10 years. Today's panel discussing this topic, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Tom Finley, co-owner of the Great Lakes Resource Center. And on his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, every 10 years, 49 of the 50 states in the Union engages in a political wrestling match known as redistricting. The majority party tries to draw lines to secure their power base, while racial, ethnic, and political minorities do what they can to protect their own turf. Do you think that current laws and court rulings are adequate enough to ensure fairness, or do you think more needs to be done?
Well, I think we need to put it into context as to what's recently happened. Arizona had a case before the Supreme Court, and it looks like the way has been cleared for them to create a commission dealing with congressional redistricting. In Ohio, there's good news on the horizon. A bipartisan commission. I pulled up Ballotpedia on the old internet there, and there was going to be a ballot issue this November dealing with Ohio's redistricting and creating a little different composition of the committee that looks at redistricting. It's obvious that there have been problems with redistricting and some people would call it, gerrymandering in Ohio. There are a lot of other states. Unfortunately, the state of Ohio ranks right up there with the state of Illinois and some others, Pennsylvania, that have really taken gerrymandering to the extreme. And this happens on both sides of the aisle. One of the proposition before this latest one that has gained bipartisan support in Ohio was presented by then State Senator John Husted in 2010. And it was similar to the one that they put in place now, but at that time, the General Assembly, the majority were Democrats, and they had the governor was Ted Strickland, a Democrat, and the Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner. They decided to roll the dice, and that proposition, that proposal never made it out of the General Assembly. It was approved by the Senate, which was Republican-controlled. And unfortunately for them, they lost in that next election. Ted Strickland and Jennifer Brunner, and the majority sort of swung to the Republicans. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I'm encouraged by what will be on the an Ohio constitutional amendment. But with the recent change, the recent Supreme Court ruling, it opens the way for the congressional redistricting for federal representatives to be looked at in a more bipartisan way. So I think each party has their fair share of the issue. I don't see this as being just a Republican issue or just a Democratic issue. The Democrats ran the state for 22 years. When they redistrict, you look at some of the old maps, it was pretty clear that they were doing their best to keep their people in power, and the Republicans have done the same thing. So I think there's a good foot forward here with this particular plan. I hope that the Democrats get on board with the congressional plan that's been put forward. It's very similar to this plan for the state, but we're sort of in a wait and see about that. They need to do their due diligence and probably need to read the tea leaves and see where they're going to be, hopefully, where they think they'll be in the next cycle. But, I think there's plenty of room for improvement, and I think both parties are on board to do something.
Wasn't there something on the ballot in Ohio since the 2010 question? And I think we discussed it here on this panel and pretty much agreed that it didn't really pass a fairness test.
Yeah, there were, from what this Ballotpedia says, there were 3 attempts in the past, and all 3 went down at the ballot box. And it really boils down to, when you get into the weeds on this, is the composition of this redistricting commission. You have the governor, the Secretary of State, the auditor, and then there's usually a majority leader. And basically it was set up so that at least 2 minority members would be on the commission. And this proposal has, it was 1, to have at least 1 minority representative on the commission. Now with the commission of 7, it has 2. And there's a variety of little things in there that hopefully will create more fairness with the process.
Ron, I know this is a topic that's been near and dear to your heart for a long time. What's your current thinking?
Well, I agree with Bryan that there's room for hope here. The thing that nags in my mind is it's a little difficult sometimes to trust politicians to do this. There are some suggestions, maybe you should have an independent commission. That's sort of attractive, except that you can't get rid of them. If you elect the officials, you can maybe vote them out if you don't like what they're doing. An independent commission, you can't necessarily do that. I don't know that that's, I pulled up this one just on a whim. This is called Plunderbund. Why we must end gerrymandering in Ohio. It turns out to be a Democratic screed. The first thing starts off with a list of bullet points of what's wrong with Ohio under the Republican administration and how we should go and eliminate Republican gerrymandering to benefit the Democrats. So that's just more of the same on the other side. So even as a Democrat, I'm not too attracted to that. So I think, my plan, if you have it, you have to have the Constitution says you have to have roughly equal number of people in each district. And this means that you're always going to be accused, at least in the major cities in Ohio and throughout the country, you're going to be accused of racial profiling because this is what the population is. Cleveland is going to have some predominantly ethnic districts, usually of brown-skinned folks. Akron will probably do the same. It's maybe going to be an improvement over what we have now in Ohio, in the federal level. Our current representative has just spread out all over, and on the state level, I don't even know who the heck my representative is. He's down in Wayne County somewhere. I don't know why. So that can be a problem. But I think that I would see the best we can hope for is on any commission we form. Both sides of the aisle, minority, majority, whatever, the best we can hope for is the kind of attitude we're trying to foster here in this forum. An idea of civility among the people, so they try to work at what's best for our people. And as a professional liberal, I kind of hope that'll happen, but I don't know. We'll go from there.
Keep hoping, Ron. Tom, you look very wise and thoughtful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, or confused. This whole business of redistricting just pushes me to the fact that the need for reform in the whole election process is just one piece of it, and that we ought to keep that perspective. For example, financial, the amount of support and the rules governing that is another one. When you look at the purpose of redistricting, and I know this is oversimplification, but it looks to me like this is almost a statistical analysis that needs to be made. And if it is, the criteria could be established, a software program created, and it would be administered and not managed. And so you would not have this business of the competition of parties getting in the road of that. My own opinion is that parties right now have evolved to the point where parties come first, country comes second. So anything that we make change-wise in this piece of reform needs, I think, keep that in mind.
That's not new, Tom. No, it hasn't evolved. It was created that way. 1864, when the Republican Party came into being. Is that when it was? No, 1860.
1860.
Yeah, anyway. Patty, you were smiling when Tom was talking,
Well, it's interesting because the redistricting a lot of times now is done by programs. There are programs out there. Unfortunately, they're not the ones that are doing it fairly. There's, it's being plugged in. How do we keep this district for ours? When you mentioned 1864, I was interested to find out that in 1788, that Patrick Henry, who was anti-federalist, tried to keep James Madison out of Congress by redistricting. And he was unsuccessful at this, and Madison, of course, went on to be a president, but this has gone on for many years. When the Dakota Territory was brought into the United States, it was divided into North and South at the time because any new state would get at least 3 electoral votes. So they're not basing it on population. They divided it into 2 territories to make sure that you could get 6 electoral votes, perhaps aiding or that would be leaning towards one successful party. I think what's been said, though, is important, that I like the idea of an independent commission. Now, this is what is proposed in Arizona. And it has been determined to be constitutional. I think there also need to be national standards, and so that it's not done differently for each state. Now, you mentioned that it can be done for race and so forth and so on. Technically, that's illegal to do, and there have been Supreme Court cases that have ruled that in some cases where they have distinctly tried to disenfranchise a certain group of people by race, by redistricting, those redistricting measures have been struck down. But it still remains the case that we have in most of our states a situation where one party has, whether it be the Democrat or Republican, whether it be California or Ohio, has moved to make districts that will support their party and their party only. And because the census only allows for the change every 10 years, it becomes very difficult to change once you are in that particular pattern, which is why we have, over 90% of our U.S. congressmen that are incumbents that get reelected. It's very, very difficult to get an incumbent out because of the way the districts are set up. And what we find is that the only choice that we have is in our particular party in the primaries. And in states such as Ohio, where it's a closed primary, you don't have much say as a voter, and you feel like your vote is, one person, one vote isn't really happening anymore. And there are many that claim that this is a form of voter fraud, and with all the interest that's been thrown towards voter fraud, this is one that is actually concurring. It seems to me at this point, instead of voters picking politicians are picking voters, so that they come in and decide what group is going to get them elected. We saw it in Ohio in the last election. I mean, our district alone, look at our district, our congressional district.
Yeah, I know.
And it was set up so that Jim Renacci would beat Betty Sutton, no matter which side you're on. I don't think that that's the way we should be doing our districting here in the state.
But what about the case of Arizona? Isn't there a flaw in that one because they're picking an independent group, but the party in power picks the independent group?
Yeah.
Is that the case in Arizona?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the whole business of commissions themselves is assuming some things that just
Sometimes
fly in
they're
the face of
impossible.
our experience base. So you're still getting back to the ill of the fox guarding the hen house when it's all said and done. And that's what my suggestion is, well, let's step back and look at this and say, what was the purpose? That would imply there is some criteria. And now how would you administer that as opposed to managing? Managing meaning someone's going to get the power on this.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm coming from.
That's the national standards that you need set up too, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, the whole thing suggests that that's possible, but in view of our past practices and I want to say lack of rational thinking on most decision-making processes in government today.
But I keep thinking back to the question that I threw to Bryan. We have laws, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, plus some additions to it, tons of case law that have dealt with so many of these issues, but still, we have the problem. When you look at the Ohio map, the districts, what is it, District 6 that goes from Youngstown all the way down to Portsmouth?
Oh, they're ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
There's some in Texas
and
like that as well.
That one in ours district, what's our district number?
Oh, I wish I could tell
16?
you. I'm embarrassed.
Well, you should be.
16.
But no, in ours, like you say, it's just as cockamamie as it can be. Well, you look at the rest of the map, and it seems to be pretty consistent. One of the questions that, well, I've got several questions on my mind, but I'll deal with this one first. The number of representatives that are allocated to each state are based on the population.
Right.
There's been some question about what is the population. Back when the 14th Amendment was first written, and I think it's Section 2, it describes all males above the age of 21, except Indians who don't pay taxes, and others who are, what, 4/5 or something like that.
3/5.
3/5 of a person, and all. But now you look at Ohio has 400,000 college students, and I'm assuming many of them are from outside of Ohio. We probably have at least that many prisoners. Who all do you count? We know we're not using the white male over 21 anymore, but do you include everybody that's in the state, or do you?
I don't know how the census works.
I don't
on that.
know.
Good question about the prisoners, though, because
They can't
I think
vote.
technically prisoners have no civil rights
Yes.
while they're in prison. So
But there's-
probably you shouldn't count them. I don't know that that's fair or not. But
Okay, well, the other thing, Patty brought it up, and I think it's worth discussing for a little bit. In the South, particularly the states of the Old South, were running rampant when it came to redistricting blacks out of the process, and they would do it two ways. One of them is called cracking. And cracking is where you would take the population, maybe a concentration of blacks, and split it and put some of them in one district and some in another to dilute their voting power. The other was packing, which meant then you pack them all together in one so that you don't affect the
Others.
the others. And it seems to me there have been a number of court cases. It's almost a no-win situation, isn't it? Trying to be fair to minorities when you're redistricting. How do you do that? I mean, I know that there's a tremendous amount of sentiment toward making sure that at least we have African American representation in the United States Congress. And if you have to do packing in order to do that, you do it, but it's illegal.
Yeah. No, they shouldn't.
Well, you go back, John, what's the purpose of redistricting? And
It is to accommodate the changes in the population shifts within a state.
okay, and now what are populations?
Yep, that's a good question.
And now you define those populations, you begin to get to statistical analysis, which the machines can do, and it takes away this business of competition and an undue management towards control of any party or any segment of the population.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just parties, but it's a segment of the population that would be interfering with healthy competition.
Yeah.
I can see one problem with that, perhaps. You may wind up with one particular geographical area having 2 or 3 representatives. because of the way in which the statistics pan out. And what do you base the statistics on? Just population, or do you base it on some other sort of criterion? African American, economic, Latino. I can see that could bring out, if you don't write the program correctly, that could bring out a considerable problem.
It would.
As
That's
bad
why.
as we can here.
That's why the definition of populations becomes so important. As part of it.
You see this issue in the state of New York, where the very high, dense populated New York City and all that. Basically, the people that live upstate,
Are conservative.
They're conservative.
Yeah.
They have no voice whatsoever, because just the way everything's. I mean, you could.
They don't have as many people
You could
there.
even have it as fair as possible, but the fact of the matter is, when you have that dense
the population.
of a population, that large of a city, the rest of the people in the state almost don't even count. And that's something that you really, when you start talking about fairness, then you have to start looking at, well, how do we make that? How do those people's voice get heard? How does the minority voice get heard in a situation on either side?
Well, Ohio works pretty much the same way. Remember the last presidential election, that early on in Ohio, the statistics said that because of the way the cities are going, the Democrats won.
Right.
And I don't know if that's fair or not. I'm happy for it, but
and that's okay. You know, I mean,
One of these days we'll have to have a panel discussion on just how wrong you are. but not today.
not today.
Well, Ohio was interesting in the last election because it was, it went for Barack Obama, and I think there were more votes tallied for Democrats in the state than there were for Republicans, and yet all of the congressional races, the local went to Republicans, and it's because of the way those votes were distributed in the various districts. And it was very, very blatant. And and fortunately this hurt the Democrats this time, but it can hurt the Republicans if it ever switches back, although it's hard to make that switch once you're in that power position. And that's why I think politicians are not willing to make the change now.
well, look at the shift in population, when this could be actually an East and West Coast thing, where the people that live in the middle are pretty much forgotten because of the population shifts that we're seeing. We see a lot of people moving to the South. Obviously, when the census comes out, they start doing the numbers. Those states in the South have more congressional representatives. Obviously, when you have that polarization, the folks in the middle, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're forgotten.
Ohio lost too, right?
Well, in the
Yeah.
most popular
Yeah.
states at any
Last
rate.
week I had occasion to be journeying through southern Wayne County, and I'm looking at those rural areas and people, and I'm thinking, there's no way they're heard. And this is before I knew I was going to sit on the other side. There's no way they're being heard. And what about what they control? That is a huge amount of land. Well, what's the importance about that? If those folks decided to quit raising food, it would be very important. And the city,
They'd move into the cities then.
the cities would be moving out to where they could, we'd have a real difficulty. But the point is, they're not being represented.
When you look at again, going back to the map of Ohio, for the most part, they're nice, compact, geometrically sound-looking districts, and that with the main idea, and one of the main ideas in redistricting is to try to keep cities and counties intact and not split them down the middle, and there are several that are. But you look at northwestern Ohio, and you look at the huge district in northwestern Ohio. I think the target is around 380,000 people per district in Ohio, and that's about how many there are. But these are in that part of the state. These are rural votes. They're Republican votes. That's a Republican district. There isn't anything you can do about that. You can't try for any kind of equity in a district like that. And you look at most of the state, it's geographically oriented. A friend of mine said, just give me a map and a ruler and I'll show you how to redistrict.
Well,
and it's something like that.
And you could.
But then you get to you start moving east where all the mischief started taking place and all. Ron, do me a favor. Define gerrymandering.
Define gerrymandering is the technique of redistricting to give a favorable outcome to one party or the other.
Okay, so that's the thing that we're talking about is gerrymandering. And it started someplace in New England and named after a scoundrel named Gerrymander.
No.
Jerry was his name. I think it was Jerry.
A district was withdrawn so that it looked something like a dragon or a lizard or a salamander. So that's a gerrymander. And I don't know if the Jerry has anything to do with
the
it.
mander is
The mander comes from salamander.
it's wasn't Jerry the name of a governor?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
Put the two together.
Yeah.
But I just defined it as cheating.
It is, but I think that you have to, sometimes we tend to lump people into categories based on politicians and lawyers and businessmen and teachers and things, and try to assign common characteristics or a set of characteristics to each group. But I think essentially we're all pretty much the same, but the environment we find ourselves in affects our behavior quite a bit. And I think that a governmental environment naturally leans toward more corruption than just about any place else, where business may tend to lean more toward greed, if you want to call it that. But essentially, human beings behave in a pretty standard way. We change when we're in a different environment. And politicians are no different than anyone else. Given a little bit of power, you're going to try to keep it as long as you can, expand on it if you can. And the way we redistrict is a pretty good demonstration of how that happens, I believe. And I'm not going to lean on you for that quote. As a matter of fact, we normally end this program with a quote, but I don't have one for today. I've forgotten to look one up, and so we're just going to say thank everybody for joining us and goodbye. Thank you, panel.